pages worth of history, and I'm going to do it in like less than 40 minutes. I don't think it's possible, but anyway. Essentially, I'm going to explain the creation myth and how the Egyptian creation myth kind of informed everything that they believed. It informed their idea of their society, their justice system, their religious system, their belief in mummification, their afterlife. And what was also very important was that the kings, when they were alive, they were kings, but when they died, they became worshipped as gods. So for them to try and establish their lineage and show that they were related to Osiris and Horus. Okay, but before I begin, I have to warn you, and I'm sorry, but I didn't realize this when I researched this topic. Like, ancient Egyptians are really very sexy, and they deal a lot with like masturbation and castration and having sex with your sister and having sex with your mother and, you know, sex after death. And I'm sorry, okay, but all right. But anyway, we're in Tel Aviv, so they told me it would be okay. Like, I couldn't do this in Jerusalem. Anyway, so we're dealing with masturbation and castration and incest, necrophilia, sibling rivalry, repeated attempts to communicate with the weather, and religious intolerance, which is, you know, who has a better imaginary friend. So basically my job was just to go to like all the ancient UNESCO World Heritage sites and sort of try and get a coherent story. And then I was working for a tour company, so we were like sending people on tours, but I don't know, you know, anyway. It depends on how safe the country is, and I'll get to that. But look, essentially UNESCO's declared purpose, they claim, is that it's an organization that promotes international collaboration between nations in the fields of education and science and culture. And they're supposed to increase universal respect and justice for human rights. That's their story. They're sticking to it. I don't know. I don't always agree with what they're doing, but I don't work there anymore, so it's okay. Anyway, so this is from the Israeli side. This is Tzekh. We have also, in case you didn't know, the Acropolis, and there is one near Kiryat Tabor as well, which is the Acropolis of Avishay, which is just very recently incorporated. Yes. Anyway, so before I start, how it happened. The erasure of memory, I thought this was the best quote I could find, which is essentially the struggle of man against power, is the struggle of memory against forgetting. And that is essentially what actually happened to hieroglyphics. They got a different government with a different religion, which just eradicated the entire system, and I'll explain it to you. Okay, so the first person that I'm going to introduce you to is Tot. He's the god of writing and also of magic spells, and after you die, your soul goes on trial, and he has like a book of helpful spells, and he helps you make the transition to the next life. And of course, the writing on the wall you'll know is from the book of Daniel, where essentially they were warned that everything they know will soon be lost. So that's the title of my speech.
It's written.
Yes, I know, it's Rembrandt. He wrote it down, but anyway. So the creation myth, let's start at the very beginning. Their creation myth is a little bit weird. Well, I mean, I don't know, all creation myths are a bit weird. First of all, it varied from city to city. So depending on where you live, there was a different one in Memphis and a different one in Heliopolis and a different one in Luxor. But at some points, they overlapped, they conflated. I'm going to just deal with the most widespread one, which is from the city of Heliopolis. And basically, they say that there was just a body of water. Nobody knows how this water came about. One day, there was a sunrise. And out of the water came something they call a Ben mound. It's like the shape of a pyramid. And that was essentially how their world was created, and more specifically how Egypt was created. And this idea is just called the first occasion. There was a sunrise, earth appeared out of the water. In the water there were 8 primordial deities. I will show them to you now. Here they are. The females, of course, are snakes. The men have got frogs' heads, and they're not actually, they don't exist, they're more like concepts. They exist as ideas, and always in ancient Egyptian mythology, there is always dualism. We have positive and negative, and we have male and female. So although these are couples, and they embody certain types of concepts of the water, like the water is unknowing, and the water is inert, and the water is dark, and the water has infinite extent.
Always the line between order and chaos.
It's coming. It's coming. They're not actually beings. However, one of them gets up one day, he masturbates the world into existence. Okay, and this you can see in the tomb of Ramses VI. It's on the wall, and he is the creator god, and he like flings all his sperm all around the world and creates all the stars and all the planets and all the human beings, and essentially he creates the other gods, which then in turn create all the human beings. So the first set of gods that he creates are called Shu and Tefnut. They're translated from hieroglyphics as dry air and moist air, but you know, what I understand is that they're wind and rain. Now, another thing about the Egyptians is that the men had to appear to be particularly masculine, so they always wore a bull's tail. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit about that. He's got a feather on his head because he's winged. She, for some reason, has the sun disk on her head, which my daughter was very amazed at, because later on when we have the sky goddess wears water. I would have thought that the rain goddess wore water, but she doesn't. Okay, so that's what they look like actually as they are drawn in the tombs. And we have, okay, so we have wind and we have rain. Ra just gets added. Like, we don't know where he comes from, he just appears. He's kind of like, as I said, he's like Nell on Ally McBeal. He's just written into the show without any explanation of how his character gets there. And like many of the gods, he's parentless, he's self-engendered, he just appears. And Ra looks like this. Okay, so he's a man with a falcon head, and he has this huge big sun disk. There is another god with a falcon head, but he doesn't have a sun disk, so I'll explain the difference later. Okay, so now continuing with creation, we now have the goddess of the sky. She's named Nut, and you can see she's got all the heavens and the stars. She's the daughter of Shu and Tefnut. This is her father. He's the one with the ostrich feather, the god of dry air. He's holding up the heavens there. And for some reason, their earth god is male, which is very unusual. But we have it. They have a male earth god. So that's basically heaven and earth. And earth has got a bird on his head, and heaven has a pot of water on his head. They're always drawn in a very consistent way so that you know who's doing what. So that when you read the hieroglyphics, you can be very clear on who's doing what, but still some people get them confused. But it's understandable. Okay, so now Geb and Nut have 4 children, and this is where the action really begins. Okay, they have Osiris, who's the king of the world. He's married to his sister Isis. And then they have another boy called Seth, and he's married to his sister called Nephthys. And this is pretty normal, and it carried forth in their society. Like, it was quite normal for siblings to marry each other and for parents to marry their children, and it was not considered at all shameful. And as you can see, Seth has tails. Okay, so Osiris becomes god of the underworld, Isis is goddess of magic, Seth is god of chaos and good strength with storms and difficult times, and Nephthys doesn't seem to have any particular powers. She's just the wife of Seth, and the sister of Isis, and she just helps people, really. So here is the family tree so far, in case you are getting a bit confused. Now you'll notice that all the males have the bull tails, except for Osiris, and the reason is because he's actually dead. That is what he looks like on the tomb of Ramses II's wife. He's green, and he's wrapped as a mummy. And how that came about is because Seth was very, very jealous that Osiris was king of the world, so he planned to kill him. Sorry, Seth was very jealous that Osiris was king of the world, so he planned to kill him. And how he did that was he invited him to a dinner party, and it was apparently quite normal to give somebody a coffin as a gift. I mean, I don't know, most people come to dinner and they get fruit, or they get flowers, or they get cakes, but okay, in Egypt you get a coffin. And he climbed in his coffin to like fit it out, and Seth locked it and threw it into the Nile River, and Osiris drowned. His wife, Isis, was very upset. So she went and she fished him out of the Nile River, and being the goddess of magic, she reanimated him. I guess she's also the goddess of Mary Shelley novels. Anyway, so this was the first sibling murder, which is, I guess, the first version of Cain killing Abel. And after that, he kills him again. Seth finds out that Osiris is not all dead, he's just mostly dead, like Wesley in The Princess Bride. So this time he cuts him up, he dismembers him, he throws him into all bits and pieces all around the world, and he castrates him and he throws his phallus into the Nile River, and it's eaten by a fish. Lost forever. I'm sorry, this, okay. You can leave if you want.
And not know how the story is?
Okay, so then what happens is Isis is very distraught again, and she decides to find all the bits of her husband with the help of his sister, and they wrap him up very tightly, kind of reconstituting his body, and he becomes the first mummy. And Isis wants a child from her husband, but he's missing his phallus, so she creates for him, I guess, what every person on the planet wants. She makes him a magical penis. And she manages to impregnate herself, and they have their son called Horus. And Isis then also becomes the goddess of motherhood. So she's represented here with baby Horus, and later on this picture becomes used for Mary and Jesus. So that's the Greek version. Okay, so now we have Isis wears her chair on her head. Her husband has been deposed, he's off his throne, so she's like the goddess Lycia with an empty chair. Just to remind us. And Nephthys has a basket. I don't know why. We don't know, but there is Osiris with his two sisters. Now, what is the first thing that you need to do after your wife has lovingly created your magical penis is you need to have sex with your wife's sister, obviously, and impregnate her as well. So, don't judge. We've all done it. Actually, I said that to somebody once and he got this most tremendous blush, so obviously he had to do it. Anyway, okay, so look, I did warn you, eh? So, okay. Now he has two children. He has one from Nephthys, who is not only his wife's sister, but also his brother's wife. And I mean, really, if you're going to kill somebody twice, obviously his wife, isn't it? While you were dead. I mean, come on, this is good. It's like better than the best soap I've ever watched. Okay, so here we have a picture with Osiris and his two sons. So Anubis is the jackal-headed god of mummification, and he's the child of Osiris and Nephthys. And Horus is the falcon-headed god of justice, and he's the child of Isis, and he wears the double crown. So he looks very similar to Ra, but Ra, of course, has the sumpers. And I just have to tell you a little bit about Seth. Here is a picture of Seth. Seth is the god of brute strength, of chaos, of storms, and he's drawn very typically like that, with this animal head. Nobody knows what it is. They just call it a Seth animal.
It's like an anteater.
Yeah, it does. They kind of think it's a bit of an anteater and a jackal or something, but the picture I find very interesting, which is like just the best form of self-promotion ever, is that is Ramses II, and he's been adored by the god of chaos and by the god of order. So what he's essentially saying is, look, I'm the king of the world, and I'm sort of like got order and chaos both to bow down to me, so like I'm just the best. which is unbelievable, but you know, here we go. So that is what Horus looks like, which is very similar to Ra, but with the crown. So now Osiris leaves the world and he goes to rule the underworld, and Isis is forced to hide Horus in the reeds of the Nile River, like Moses. Nephthys, of course, convinces Seth that Anubis is his child, which is a bit weird because Anubis is the god of mummification, and I think that would be obvious that his father's dead, but anyway. And Seth rules the world for some years until Horus eventually grows up and challenges him to the throne. So he is Hamlet for this portion of the story, because his uncle has stolen his throne. And Horus does things legally first. He sues him in court, in divine court, and Ra gets to be the judge. And Ra decides that his claim is valid, but that he's too young. So Horus then decides to challenge this to physical combat. And being younger and stronger he wins, which makes no sense because they're all gods and they're all divine and they all have superpowers and they all live forever. So I don't know. Now, in the older versions of the story, Horus actually kills Seth. But as time passed and as details were added and as the story elaborated, they changed it a little bit. And later on, Ra actually gives Seth a job. Seth is the god of chaos, and Ra's job is to sail across the world every day on a boat. And apparently there are like big chaotic snakes that are living there and that could probably harm him. So he gives Seth the job of like being the guardian of the celestial sun god. And we can clearly see that Seth is using his chaos to fight off another form of chaos. So they were very tolerant in the sense that they didn't punish you for having talents that perhaps didn't fit. They just like found the appropriate job for you. So Seth's brute force and his chaos was put to good use. And of course, if you went to war, he's the god that you should pray for. So essentially this creation myth became really who they were as a society. It became their religion, it became the model for their lives, for their belief system, for their religion, for everything, their justice system. People on a daily basis fought a battle with like instability, insecurity. Scorpions could bite you, spiders could bite you, crocodiles could eat your children. Like life was very insecure. And Horus represented stability and order and justice and goodness. And Seth was chaos, but even chaos is not really bad. You just have to find the correct way to use it. So, two consequences of this creation myth was that firstly Pharaoh had to do a kind of annual sports festival, which was literally running hurdles, running races, picking up weights. And this was as a result of this fight where Horus challenged the throne. And this festival was called Hebsed, and it literally means the festival of the tail. And the second thing that they did, and I'm sorry about this, but he had to conduct a public masturbation festival which reenacted their creation, and it was called the Festival of Nin. And this is the Egyptian god Nin, and he is the god of male virility and fertility. And and every year on a certain day, which is I guess like ancient Egyptian Rosh Hashanah, they reenacted the creation of the world by everybody having a mass public festival of masturbating next to an River. Wow. So you know this word, right? Okay. So one of the things that we learn from them is that they're very tolerant and they're very flexible and they have a syncretic belief system. And many of the gods were like combined, they were manifested inside each other, and this is the god Atum, who's being combined with Ra, and he makes Amun Ra. And this is a picture of Tutankhamun, who married his sister Akhenaten, and that was perfectly acceptable. They were very flexible in their relationships. More importantly, sex was held in very high regard in their culture. So what was very important was that you should have sex after death. So you shouldn't allow your death to interrupt your sex life. That would just be inconvenient and bad planning. And in this particular case, they put a little stick in the mummy's members so that to ensure that he doesn't have erectile dysfunction in his next life. Okay, so you also get to be not entirely dead. Death itself is very fluid, and there are court records where dead people have been sued. And, they didn't pay their debts. They brought their statue to court, and they cross-questioned their statue. So don't think you can get out of paying your money. It's not going to work. Anyway, so part of this this life being a preparatory life for the next life is that the body and the soul had to be prepared, and they had very elaborate mummification rituals. So, this is Anubis, which is, when all you want to do is sleep, but your dog won't let you. So, after death, they removed the brain, they drilled a little hole in the nose, and they kind of sucked it out. And then they dried out your body with a special fat baking soda, it's called natron. And they put your organs in canopic jars, except for the heart. And your heart went on trial. So these are the canopic jars. They have one for the lungs, one for the liver, one for the intestines, one for the stomach. They did dry out the heart, but they stitched it back into the chest cavity because it was very important that your soul remained inside you. And I just thought these were very beautiful. So those are the canopic jars of Tutankhamun, which you can see in Cairo at the Antiquities Museum. Anyway, so...
They're alabaster.
Yes. So, after you die, your heart goes on trial, and the heart is weighed against an ostrich feather. This picture is not very clear, I'm sorry, but that's the heart in a little jar, and that's the ostrich feather. And, if your heart is filled with lies and deceit, and it's heavy from all the sin, it will sink, and the ostrich feather will rise, and this strange beast called the Great Devourer gets to eat your heart. Now, she's female, and she's part crocodile and part hippopotamus and part lion, and her name is Amit. She's not your friend. And we have 42 assessor judges on the top, and they kind of put you on trial and they ask you many questions. Sometimes you just have to declare your innocence, and one of the things that you had to say when you walked through the Hall of Truth was, I never drank any urine, and I never ate any excrement. They didn't really ask you if you had sex with your mother, that was okay. Okay, so it's interesting to note here that Tot has a book which we call the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but in hieroglyphics that is actually translated as the Book of Coming into the Light. And there is Anubis, the god of mummification, and he's holding the person's hand to make the transition into the next life. Okay, so this continued for a very long time, and they have 31 dynasties, and everything was as normal, except that their last Persian king fell to Alexander the Great in 332. And things started to change a little bit. So this is what Alexander normally looks like, as we know him. This is from a mosaic in Pompeii. This is how he appears incarnate, because nobody knew who he was, because nobody could read hieroglyphics. But here he is being inducted into the throne hall of pharaohs, and he's wearing the gold crown of Egypt. And that is the god Amun. Because Alexander knew that if he wanted to be taken seriously as a pharaoh, he had to actually be the king of Egypt, and he dressed in their special clothes and everything. And he's holding a tray of incense cloves, by the way, in case you don't know what it is. And although he was king, he only stayed in Egypt for 6 months. But he did something very interesting, which, I don't know. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So Alexander moved his capital city to the city of Alexandria, conveniently named after him. And he founded the Great Royal Library of Alexandria. And it was supposedly the largest library in the world at the time, and it contained 400,000 scrolls, which really was an unbelievable amount of information. Okay, so under Greek rule, they kind of lived nicely together. They coexisted well. The Greeks also had polytheism. They were also syncretic. They were polylingual, which is kind of what ultimately saved hieroglyphics. They were very democratic. They published everything in all the alphabets. And here is a kind of unusual god. It's a god called Anubis, which is a syncretic combination of Hermes and Anubis. It's in the Vatican Museum, of all places. So they've combined the two, and you can see that they lived well. We have a Greek mummy, we have an Egyptian mummy, and everything was fine for 300 years. And then Julius Caesar came, and he ousted the Greeks. And the last ruling Greek queen, which was Cleopatra the Great, as we know her, there were like 20 Ptolemies and like 12 Cleopatras, I think. So, we distinguish this one as the last one. But I guess we know her actually as Elizabeth Taylor. And here she is in a 5.5-hour film. So anyway, she first, there was what is known as the Roman Civil War, okay, which is essentially just that she and her brother put up a tremendous fight against Julius Caesar. According to the Romans, this was a civil war. According to the Egyptians, it was an invasion. But, okay. What actually happened as a result of this conflict was that Julius Caesar was forced to set his own ships on fire. He was besieged in the harbor of Alexandria, and in doing that, he managed to set the library on fire. So he burned down about, I don't know, they say like 35-40% of the library accidentally, which was about 125,000 scrolls at the time, which was a lot of translations from hieroglyphics. So, it's okay. And once they were under Roman rule, Romans didn't fund this library. But true disaster struck with Constantine the Great, or as I like to call him, not so great. He converted to Christianity in 310 AD. He's famous because he's apparently organized...
312, I think.
Sorry?
312.
Okay.
The Battle on the Malvern Bridge.
And he's famous for building the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and of course he renamed Istanbul Constantinople. But as you know, Christianity is not a syncretic polytheistic religion. It's a revealed religion, which means that the entire doctrine is revealed like directly from God. So nothing can be altered, nothing can be added, nothing can be changed. And what was considered completely normal for centuries was not considered wrong. It was not considered pagan. It was desecration of corpses. It was just another form of witchcraft. And they were not tolerant. Christians have a real pervasive sense of evil. They don't just like have, okay, we have some chaos and we have to harness it and it's okay, we can control it. Satan is out to get you. So very slowly, as Christianity spread, the temples were closed And the last temple was closed in 394 AD. It was the Philae temple, which is on an island near the Aswan Dam. And hieroglyphics themselves became frowned upon because it was the language of the original people, and both the Greeks and the Romans kind of had the problem is they didn't speak the local language. They were considered kind of like colonial invaders. So it was better that they just eliminated the language entirely. So this is the last line of hieroglyphics ever written. And it's from the Philae temple, and it says, before Mandalus, son of Horus, by the hand of Esmet, Akun, son of Esmet, the second priest of Isis, for all time and eternity. So I guess it's a prayer that he's wanting eternal life, but anyway, nobody knew what that was at all. So, we have a period where everything that they knew, all their culture, their religion, their daily life, their engineering, their medicine, their astronomy, their mathematics, even just how they cooked their food and sort of pasteurized the water, which was making beer really, and particularly the medical knowledge, because it was acceptable to cut up corpses that were lost, and Egyptian doctors were very, very famous in the ancient world, and this tradition of really good doctors continued because even Moses Maimonides was the doctor of the king of Egypt. And all of that was lost, the building particularly. The Greeks were a little bit weird. They thought when women were upset, you should hang them upside down in the uterus before to their head, and then they'd be less hysterical. Anyway.
The word hysteria is coming from uterus.
You have to hang them upside down, and then the uterus falls back into their head. Okay, so you don't have to operate with great manners to do great harm. Absence of empathy and understanding are sufficient. And, let's just go back to UNESCO. This is Palmyra. It was just collapsed, destroyed in 2007. So it was like only 3 years ago. And this is Hypatia of Alexandria. She is a mathematician. Yeah, I'm going to start 71. She's a mathematician, and she used to use this little device called an astrolabe. And what it does is it measures the celestial bodies about the horizon. And she was beaten to death in the streets for being rich. So, have this very intolerant religion which didn't allow any expression of anything else. And we have like 1,000 years of the Dark Ages. And then, of course, eventually, we had the Renaissance and the Napoleonic Wars. And some French soldiers found this stone. They were actually just using rubble to build other houses, but then they found this one, which what they think it looks like over there. That's part of it. And it has 3 very distinct scripts on it. One is Greek, one is Demotic, which is hieroglyphics, form of cursive, and then actual ancient hieroglyphics themselves. And this is Champollion, and how he did it was he found the word for Ptolemy in Greek, and then he found in hieroglyphics, which is there, as you can see. And he very fortunately had a second stone. He had an obelisk from the Philae temple, which had the word Cleopatra on, which they knew was Cleopatra. So he was able to swap them out, and he was simply able to realize that, as you can see, the P is a square from Ptolemy and Cleopatra, and the L is a lion, and the O is kind of a knotted rope, and the E is a leaf. And he figured out, because they had thought that they were ideograms, he figured out that it's an alphabet, but more than this. It's an alphabet that is also combined with ideograms, that is also combined with what they call designators. Now, for example, this little circle at the end is a reference to the goddess Isis. So what they're really telling us is that Cleopatra was a woman. So they had a phonetic alphabet, they had ideograms, and they had designators for clarification. And finally, after 2,000 years, we had it. So this is the end of my talk. And, you know, as I said, I kind of thought it was going to be about translation, but it seems more to be about tolerance. So my final picture is this one.